He wasn't just a husband. He was a monster hiding in plain sight. Jonathan Davenport, a titan of the tech industry, lived a life of public adoration and private cruelty. His wife, Catherine, carried his heir, a secret symbol of hope in a home filled with shadows. But when his devotion to a calculating mistress boiled over into an act of unforgivable violence against his pregnant wife, he made a fatal miscalculation. He didn't just attack a helpless woman, he declared war on an unseen dynasty. For Catherine wasn't just Catherine, she was a Hayes, and the Hayes family doesn't just get mad. They get even. This is the story of how one brutal mistake cost a man everything, as his billionaire in-laws orchestrated the most ruthless corporate takedown in modern history, proving that the only thing more powerful than a new money empire is old money revenge. The penthouse on Central Park West was less a home and more a museum of Jonathan Davenport's success. It was a space of cold marble, gleaming glass, and art chosen for its investment value rather than its beauty. From the floor-to-ceiling windows, New York City sprawled below, a glittering kingdom that Jonathan believed he had conquered. And in the heart of it all was Catherine Hayes Davenport, his beautiful, 6 months pregnant wife, the final, perfect acquisition. Catherine traced the rim of her chamomile tea mug, the warmth a small comfort against the chill that had seeped into her marriage. She remembered the man she had fallen in love with, the ambitious, charming disruptor who had promised her the world. Jonathan had been a whirlwind of energy, his mind a dazzling labyrinth of code and strategy. He'd built Davenport Innovations from a garage startup into a multi-billion-dollar behemoth that shaped how people communicated, worked, and lived. She had admired his drive, his ferocity. She hadn't realized that ferocity needed a constant target. Lately that target had been her. It began with small things, a casual dismissal of her opinion in front of friends, a sharp, impatient sigh when she moved too slowly, a coldness that settled in his eyes when she spoke of the baby, their baby, with a joy he clearly did not share. He called it the distraction, a biological necessity that was disrupting the perfect synergy of his life. "You're nesting, Kate. It's hormonal," he'd said last night, not looking up from his tablet, where stock tickers scrolled in an endless, hypnotic river of green and red. "Just try to keep it contained to the spare rooms. I need my office to remain a zone of high-level productivity." Her hand instinctively went to the gentle swell of her belly, a protective gesture that had become second nature. Their son. She knew it was a boy, a mother's intuition. He was a flutter of life, a secret promise of warmth in this cold, sterile palace. He was the reason she tolerated the chilling evolution of her husband. Tonight was the bi-monthly dinner with her parents, Robert and Margaret Hayes, an ordeal. Not because she didn't love them, she adored them, but because they saw right through Jonathan. Her parents weren't impressed by his new money swagger. The Hayes family fortune was old, deep, and quiet, rooted in global logistics and shipping, the arteries of world commerce. Hayes Global was a silent giant next to Davenport Innovations' noisy disruption. Robert Hayes was a man who could move mountains of steel across oceans with a single phone call, and he did it all with the understated elegance of a bespoke Savile Row suit. He saw Jonathan not as a titan, but as a gambler on a hot streak, and he made no secret of his skepticism. The private elevator opened directly into their foyer. Her parents stepped out, Margaret enveloping her in a soft, cashmere-scented hug, her eyes full of a mother's concern. "You look tired, darling," she whispered. "Just the baby," Catherine lied, forcing a smile. Robert kissed her forehead, his gaze sweeping the apartment before landing on her. His eyes, a sharp, intelligent blue, missed nothing. "Where is he?" he asked, his voice a low baritone that commanded attention without ever needing to be raised. "He's on a call. He'll be right out," Catherine said, leading them towards the living area. Jonathan emerged 10 minutes later, all brilliant smiles and feigned warmth. He clapped Robert on the shoulder, a gesture of forced familiarity that made her father stiffen ever so slightly. "Robert, Margaret, good to see you. The market's been a wild ride this week. We just closed a deal that's going to revolutionize AI integration in personal security." "How fascinating," Robert said, his tone utterly flat. "Catherine tells us you're planning another trip. Singapore, is it?" "Expansion, Robert. The Asian market is ripe," Jonathan said, pouring himself a generous glass of whiskey. He gestured towards Catherine's glass of water. "Can't have any of the good stuff herself, of course. Doctor's orders." The conversation was a strained dance of pleasantries stretched thin over a chasm of mutual dislike. Jonathan boasted of his achievements, his acquisitions, his vision. Her parents listened with polite, impenetrable stoicism. Catherine sat between them, a silent ambassador between two warring nations, the swell of her belly the only neutral territory. Dinner was a quiet affair, catered by a private chef who served 3 Michelin-starred courses that Catherine could barely stomach. The tension was thick enough to be a 4th course. It was during dessert, a deconstructed tiramisu, that the first crack appeared in Jonathan's flawless facade. His phone, placed face down on the table beside him, a cardinal sin of etiquette in her father's eyes, buzzed with a sharp, insistent vibration. Jonathan's eyes flicked to it. He reached for it, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features before he seemed to remember his audience and drew his hand back, but the screen had lit up. Just for a second. In the dim light of the dining room, from her angle, Catherine could see the notification. "Veronica. Can't wait. The suite is incredible. Don't be late." Veronica. The name seared itself into her brain. His new head of strategic alliances. A woman with sharp cheekbones, a sharper mind, and a predatory stillness that had unsettled Catherine from the moment they were introduced at a company gala. Jonathan had praised her effusively, calling her his greatest asset. "Everything all right, Jonathan?" Margaret asked, her voice soft but pointed. "It's nothing," Jonathan said quickly, flipping the phone over. Too quickly. Spam. The curse of modern life. He took a large bite of his dessert, his jaw working. Robert Hayes said nothing. He simply looked at his son-in-law, then at his daughter. He saw the flicker of pain in her eyes, the way her smile became a fragile, brittle thing. He had seen that look before, in the eyes of business rivals just before he broke them. It was the look of someone realizing they had been utterly, catastrophically betrayed. He carefully placed his fork down, the silver chiming softly against the porcelain plate. The sound was as definitive as a gavel strike. The polite fiction of the evening was over. The Cold War had just begun, and Catherine, sitting in the heart of her gilded cage, finally understood that the monster she feared wasn't at the door. He was sitting right beside her. The days that followed the disastrous dinner were a study in manufactured normalcy. Jonathan was either absent or meticulously, unnaturally cheerful. He brought Catherine flowers, peonies her favorite, with a card that read, "For my beautiful wife." He complimented the progress of the nursery, a room he hadn't set foot in for weeks. He was building an alibi, brick by perfect, deceitful brick. But Catherine wasn't a fool. The name Veronica had become a ghost that haunted the silent, cavernous rooms of their home. Sleep became a stranger. She'd lie awake long after Jonathan's breathing had deepened into a steady rhythm, the city lights painting stripes across their bed. Her mind raced, replaying conversations, re-examining moments she had previously dismissed as stress or paranoia. The late nights he'd called server crises, the weekend strategy retreats, the faint, unfamiliar scent of perfume on his suit jacket that he'd blamed on an overzealous realtor in a crowded elevator. It was a mosaic of deceit, and Veronica was the missing piece that made the ugly picture complete. She knew she couldn't confront him without proof. Jonathan was a master of deflection and gaslighting. He would twist her words, weaponize her pregnancy hormones against her, and make her feel like a hysterical, paranoid fool. She needed something concrete, something undeniable. The opportunity came on a Tuesday morning. Jonathan was in a rush, heading to an early board meeting. In his haste, he left his personal tablet on the kitchen island. It was an older model, one he rarely used now, preferring his newer, sleeker devices. But it was still logged into his personal cloud account. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of dread and determination. This felt like a violation, a step into a darkness from which she might not return. But staying in the dark was no longer an option. With trembling fingers, she opened his photo stream. At first, it was all business. Charts, architectural renderings of new campuses, team photos from corporate events. Then she found it. A hidden album, password protected. The password, pathetically, was Innovate 2025. She was in. The contents of the album stole the air from her lungs. It wasn't just Veronica. It was a gallery of infidelity, dozens of photos. Veronica laughing on a yacht, her head thrown back, Jonathan's arm wrapped possessively around her bare waist. Veronica in a silk robe on a hotel balcony, the skyline of Singapore, the destination of his upcoming business trip, gleaming behind her. There were selfies, intimate and smug, filled with the casual cruelty of a shared secret. They weren't just sleeping together. They were building a life in the stolen moments of his marriage. A wave of nausea, sharper and more acidic than any morning sickness she had experienced, washed over her. She stumbled to the sink, her body shaking. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the flagrant disrespect. He hadn't just cheated, he had documented it, catalogued it like another one of his corporate acquisitions. She scrolled further, a kind of numb horror propelling her. There were emails, drafts of legal documents exploring ways to shield assets in the event of a no-fault divorce. He had been planning this, planning to discard her once the biological necessity of an heir was fulfilled. Her blood ran cold. The baby wasn't a bond that held them together. To him, it was a transaction, and the final payment was her dismissal. She knew what she had to do. She forwarded the most damning photos and a single, devastatingly callous email to her own secure account before deleting the evidence of her intrusion. She felt a profound and chilling calm settle over her. The loving wife was gone, shattered by the digital proof of her husband's treachery. In her place was a haze, and a haze didn't break. They prepared for war. That evening, she waited for him in the living room, the city lights her only company. She didn't turn on the lamps. She let the shadows gather, a reflection of the darkness that had consumed her heart. Jonathan walked in at 9, loosening his tie. "Kate?" Sitting in the dark, trying to save on the electric bill, he joked, his voice echoing in the vast room. "We need to talk, Jonathan," she said. Her voice was steady, devoid of the tears he likely expected. He sighed, the performance of the doting husband vanishing instantly. "I've had a brutal day. Can this wait?" "No," she said, her tone absolute. "It can't. Who is Veronica Shaw?" He froze, his hand halfway to the whiskey decanter. A flicker of something, was it panic, crossed his face before being replaced by a mask of weary condescension. My head of strategic alliances, a brilliant executive. Why? Are you sleeping with her? The question hung in the air, sharp and lethal. He laughed, a dry, dismissive sound. Oh, for God's sake, Kate. Are you serious? Your hormones are running wild. I don't have time for this jealousy. I saw the photos, Jonathan. On your tablet, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Singapore, the yacht. I saw the emails about shielding your assets. The colour drained from his face, the mask shattered. He was cornered, and a cornered predator is at its most dangerous. He stalked across the room, his movements suddenly sharp and menacing. You went through my private things? He hissed, his voice a low snarl. You violated my privacy? You violated our marriage, she shot back, rising to her feet, her protective hand on her belly. You violated every promise you ever made to me. He didn't deny it. He didn't even try. His arrogance was too immense. It's nothing, he spat, his face inches from hers. It's a meaningless diversion. Men like me have needs, pressures you couldn't possibly comprehend. Veronica understands that. She doesn't cling. She doesn't drain me with her incessant emotional demands. Each word was a physical blow. He was blaming her. He was twisting his betrayal into her failure. I am carrying your son, she cried, her voice finally breaking. Don't you dare use that to manipulate me, he sneered. You think that gives you some kind of permanent claim? You are my wife. You will act like it. You will not speak of this again. You will not breathe a word of it to your parents. Do you understand me? This is my world, Catherine. You are living in it. Don't ever forget that. He turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the shadows. The threat was clear. She wasn't his partner. She was his possession, and he had just made it clear that he would do anything to protect his perfect world, even if it meant destroying hers. The air in the penthouse grew thick and suffocating in the week that followed the confrontation. Jonathan treated Catherine with a chilling, contemptuous politeness. He was a stranger in her home, a dangerous animal she had to tiptoe around. He was waiting for her to break, to cry, to beg for a return to their fractured illusion of a marriage. But Catherine did none of those things. A cold resolve had settled deep within her bones. She was playing for time, figuring out her next move, consulting discreetly with a divorce lawyer her father had recommended years ago, just in case. Her quiet defiance infuriated Jonathan. He was a man accustomed to control, to seeing his will imposed on the world. Catherine's silence was a form of rebellion he couldn't stomach. The tension coiled tighter and tighter with each passing day, a spring being wound to its absolute limit. The breaking point came on a rainy Friday night. Jonathan had been scheduled to fly to Singapore the next morning for his expansion trip. Catherine knew it was a lie. He was going to be with Veronica. The thought of them together in that hotel suite from the photos, laughing at her, was a constant, burning agony. He came home late, well after midnight. The sharp, cloying scent of expensive gin preceded him into the living room where Catherine was trying to read, the words blurring on the page. She could see the rage simmering just beneath his skin. His jaw was tight, his movements jerky. Something was wrong. The trip's been postponed, he bit out, slamming his briefcase onto the marble coffee table with a crack that made her jump. Oh, is everything all right? She asked, keeping her voice even. No, everything is not all right, he snarled, turning to face her. His eyes were bloodshot. Veronica's threatening to go to the press. Some bottom-feeding journalist got a tip about us, and now she's panicking. She wants me to leave you. Tonight. She wants me to announce our separation before the story breaks." Catherine's heart stopped. So this was it. The mistress was making her move. "And what did you tell her?" Jonathan let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "What do you think I told her? I told her to calm down, that I'd handle it. But this is your fault. All of this. If you hadn't been so needy, so emotional, snooping through my things, this never would have spun out of control." "My fault?" Catherine stood up, her book falling to the floor. The injustice of his words was a white-hot poker to her soul. "You're the one who cheated, Jonathan. You're the one who lied and built this entire sordid mess. Do not put this on me." "I built an empire!" he roared, his voice bouncing off the cold, unforgiving surfaces of the room. "I have a reputation, a legacy, and you, with your moods and your hormones and your perfect little family expectations, you are going to drag it all down. All I ever wanted was a husband, a partner, not a CEO who scheduled me in like a meeting. And I wanted a wife who understood what it takes to stay at the top, not one who cries because I have to miss a birthing class." The argument escalated, his voice growing louder, more menacing. He paced the room like a caged tiger, his words becoming more vile, more personal. He insulted her intelligence, her background, her worth. And then he turned his venom on the one thing that was sacred. "And this baby," he sneered, gesturing contemptuously at her stomach. "This miracle. It's a complication, a liability, an anchor I'm going to have to drag around for the next 18 years. Something inside Catherine snapped. All the pain, the betrayal, the fear coalesced into a single point of pure, protective fury. "You will not talk about my son that way," she said, her voice low and trembling with rage. "He is the only good thing to come out of this entire sham of a marriage. I'm leaving you, Jonathan. I'm leaving, and I'm taking him with me. You will not have the satisfaction of a perfect family photo for your brand while you destroy us behind closed doors." His face contorted into a mask of pure fury. The last vestiges of the civilized man she had once known were stripped away, revealing the monster beneath. "You're not going anywhere," he hissed, advancing on her. "You are not taking my son, and you are not ruining my life." She stood her ground, her chin high. "Watch me." That was when he shoved her. It wasn't a small push. It was a violent, two-handed shove to her chest that sent her stumbling backward. Her heel caught on the edge of a thick rug. Time seemed to slow down. She flailed, her arms windmilling, trying to regain her balance, but her center of gravity was already compromised by her pregnancy. She fell, hard. Her side and hips slammed against the sharp corner of the marble coffee table. A bolt of excruciating pain shot through her, so intense it made her vision flash with white spots. She cried out, a sound of pure agony and terror, instinctively curling into a ball on the floor, her arms wrapping around her belly as if her body could form a shield. "My baby," she gasped, the words choked with tears and pain. "Oh God, the baby." Jonathan stood over her, his chest heaving, his face pale with shock at what he had done. But in his eyes, there was no remorse. There was only fury that she had pushed him this far. He took a step towards her, his hand raised. For a horrifying second, she thought he was going to strike her again as she lay helpless on the floor. But the sound of a key in the private elevator's lock made him freeze. It was Grayson, her parents' head of security, an unflappable man who had been with her family for 30 years. She had called him an hour earlier, her intuition screaming that the night would end badly, and asked him to wait in the lobby. "Just in case," she'd said. Grayson stepped into the foyer and took in the scene in an instant. Catherine on the floor, weeping in pain. Jonathan standing over her, his face a mask of rage. Grayson's expression did not change, but a cold, dangerous light entered his eyes. "Is there a problem here, Mr. Davenport?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with steel. Catherine used the last of her strength to push herself up slightly. "Grayson," she sobbed. "Call my father. Tell him what Jonathan did." The words hung in the air, an indictment and a death sentence. Jonathan stared, his empire, his legacy, his entire world beginning to fracture and crumble, all because of one final, brutal, unforgivable act. The spring had snapped. The drive to the Hayes family estate in Westchester County was a blur of flashing lights and muted sirens. Grayson had made 2 calls. The first was to a private medical team affiliated with a top city hospital, bypassing the usual 911 dispatch to ensure absolute discretion and the best possible care. The second, more consequential call was to Robert Hayes. Catherine hadn't heard the conversation, but she saw the grim set of Grayson's jaw. They had bundled her into a black town car with blacked-out windows, leaving Jonathan standing dumbstruck in the middle of his marble museum, the first tremor of fear finally breaking through his rage. The paramedics had worked on her in the back seat, their professional calm a stark contrast to the storm of terror raging inside her. Every twinge, every cramp, was a new wave of panic. Was the baby okay? Had that monstrous impact on the table harmed him? They arrived at the gates of the Hayes estate, a sprawling sanctuary of old stone, manicured lawns, and ancient oak trees. It was the home where she had grown up, a world away from the cold modernity of her penthouse. As the car crunched up the gravel driveway, the front doors of the main house swung open. Her parents were standing there, silhouetted against the warm light, waiting. Margaret rushed to the car as the door opened, her face a mask of anguish. She helped Catherine out, her touch infinitely gentle. "Oh, my darling girl," she murmured, her voice thick with unshed tears. "My poor baby." Robert Hayes stood beside his wife, his stillness more terrifying than any outburst. His eyes swept over Catherine, taking in the blossoming bruise on her cheek where her head had struck the floor, the way she cradled her belly, the tear tracks on her face. He looked at the grim-faced paramedic who gave him a slight, reassuring nod, indicating that for now the immediate danger had passed. Robert's gaze was glacial. It was the look of a man processing a fundamental, unforgivable violation. He had entrusted his only child, his most precious treasure, to a man he distrusted. And that man hadn't just failed him, he had committed the ultimate sin. He had laid hands on his daughter. "Take her inside," Robert said to Margaret, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Dr. Petrova is on her way from the city. She'll meet us here." Dr. Lena Petrova was Catherine's OB-GYN, a woman whose discretion and expertise were legendary. Her parents wouldn't trust her care to anyone else. Inside, they settled Catherine into a guest suite on the ground floor. It was a room of soft creams and gentle blues, filled with the scent of lavender from the gardens. Margaret fussed over her, bringing her water and stroking her hair, her quiet presence a soothing balm. But as Catherine looked at her father, who stood by the window staring out into the dark night, she saw something she had only witnessed once before, during a hostile takeover that had threatened his company 2 decades ago. She saw the predator. The lion had been woken. When Dr. Petrova arrived with a portable ultrasound machine, the room grew tense. As she squeezed the cold gel onto Catherine's belly, Catherine held her breath, her hand gripping her mother's. The moments of silence, as the doctor moved the transducer, were agonizing. Then, a miracle. The rhythmic, powerful thump, thump, thump of a tiny, perfect heartbeat filled the quiet room. Catherine let out a sob of pure, unadulterated relief, tears streaming down her face. "He's okay," she whispered, He's okay. He's a strong little fighter, Dr. Petrova said with a warm smile. The placenta is fine, no signs of abruption. You've sustained some deep bruising on your hip, and you'll be sore for weeks. But you were lucky. You protected him well. After the doctor left, prescribing bed rest and calm, Margaret finally let her own tears fall, hugging her daughter tightly. He will pay for this, Catherine. I swear to you, he will pay for this. It was then that Robert Hayes turned from the window. The grief and fear in his eyes had been replaced by a chilling, absolute clarity. He walked over to the bed and took Catherine's hand. "This is no longer your fight, sweetheart," he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "This is ours. You will focus on yourself and on my grandson. You will heal. You will not answer his calls. You will not see him. You will not think about him. Do you understand?" Catherine nodded, a sense of profound relief washing over her. She was safe. She could finally let go. The burden was no longer hers to carry alone. Robert kissed her forehead, and then walked to the antique mahogany desk in the corner of the room. He picked up the phone and dialed a number from memory. He did not say hello. "Abernathy," he said, his voice as cold and sharp as a shard of ice. "Wake up. I need you." There was a pause. Catherine could imagine the man on the other end. Arthur Abernathy, the family's lead counsel for 40 years, a legal shark with a mind like a steel trap. "It's Jonathan Davenport," Robert continued, his gaze fixed on the darkness outside. "He put his hands on my daughter." Another pause, this one longer, heavier. "The objective is total annihilation. I want his company. I want his reputation. I want his future. I want him to have nothing left but the memory of what he lost. I want him so buried in litigation and debt that he won't see the sun for a decade. Use every resource, every contact, every dollar. Spare nothing. I want to ruin him. Leave nothing but scorched earth." He listened for a moment, then said, "Good," and hung up the phone. He turned back to his wife and daughter. The lion and the lioness. He was the strategist, the executioner. Margaret, Catherine knew, would be the enforcer of their family's well-being, a wall of maternal fury that no one would dare cross. The Hayes family was mobilizing for war. Jonathan Davenport had assaulted a queen, and in doing so had invited the full, wrathful power of her king and his entire kingdom down upon his head. He thought he was a titan of the new world, but he was about to learn a very old lesson. You do not strike a lion's cub and expect to survive the dawn. Jonathan Davenport woke the next morning to a world that was, on the surface, unchanged. The skyline was the same, the stock market was open, and his name was still on the door of his gleaming tower. But a subtle, unnerving silence had fallen. Catherine's calls went straight to a disconnected number. Grayson, the stone-faced security chief, was gone. It was as if she and her entire existence had been wiped clean from the penthouse. He felt a prickle of unease, but his arrogance quickly smothered it. She was being dramatic. Her parents were coddling her. They'd posture and threaten, but in the end, they were civilized people. They wouldn't dare challenge him in his arena. Business was business. He was wrong. The first shot was fired not with a cannon, but with the silent, lethal precision of a sniper's rifle. It happened at 9:31 a.m., 1 minute after the opening bell on Wall Street. A massive, anonymous block of Davenport Innovation stock was dumped onto the market, triggering an immediate, panicked sell-off. The price, which had been climbing steadily for months, dipped 5%, then 10%. Jonathan, watching the ticker on his office monitor, felt a jolt of alarm. He called his top trader. "What the hell is happening?" "I don't know," The man shouted over the din of the trading floor. "It's a ghost! A huge institutional cell, but it's being routed through a dozen shell corporations. We're trying to trace it, but it's like punching smoke." By noon, the stock was down 18%. The financial news networks were buzzing. "Instability at Davenport Innovations?" one headline blared. "Investors spooked by rumors of leadership crisis," screamed another. The rumors, vague and unsubstantiated, seemed to appear out of nowhere, spreading through the financial world like a virus. Whispers of a secret SEC investigation, of cooked books, of a catastrophic failure in their new security AI. None of it was true, but in the world of high finance, perception is reality. This was phase 1 of Robert Hayes's attack, financial warfare. Through his vast global network and decades of accumulated favors, he had initiated a coordinated assault. Allied hedge funds, shadowy private equity firms, and powerful overseas investors, all loyal to the Hayes name, began to systemically dismantle Jonathan's company from the outside. The massive sell-off was just the beginning. It was designed to create chaos and drive the price down. Phase 2 began that afternoon. Legal strangulation. Arthur Abernathy, a man who looked like a kindly grandfather but possessed the soul of a piranha, had mobilized a legal army. Lawsuits that had been settled years ago were suddenly appealed. Disgruntled former employees, previously silenced by ironclad NDAs, were suddenly contacted by lawyers from prestigious firms, offering to represent them pro bono in wrongful termination and intellectual property theft suits. The seed money for these suits, of course, flowed directly from a Hayes-controlled trust. A high-priority courier arrived at Jonathan's office, delivering a summons. It was a civil suit filed by one Catherine Hayes Davenport for assault and battery, seeking damages that were astronomical. Attached was a temporary restraining order, barring him from coming within 500 feet of her family, or any Hayes property. But that was just the appetizer. An hour later, the big banks started calling. The consortium that had financed his last major acquisition was calling in their loan, citing a material adverse change clause in their contract, a clause triggered by the stock's sudden, inexplicable plunge and the swirl of negative rumors. Jonathan was leveraged to the hilt. He didn't have the liquid capital to cover it. He was financially cornered. He spent the rest of the day in a whirlwind of frantic calls, trying to stop the bleeding. He tried to project calm to his board, to his investors, to his terrified employees. But for the first time in his life, he felt a genuine, gut-wrenching fear. The attacks were too coordinated, too sophisticated, too relentless. It wasn't random market fluctuation. This was an execution. By evening, Phase 3 was in full swing, public humiliation. The first story broke on a well-respected, if gossipy, financial blog. The headline was devastating. Tech titan Jonathan Davenport, accused of domestic abuse. Pregnant wife flees penthouse. The article was meticulously detailed, citing anonymous but highly credible sources. It painted a picture of a violent, unstable man hiding behind a facade of innovation and success. It mentioned his affair with Veronica Shaw by name. It even included a grainy security photo of Catherine being helped into the car by Grayson, her face bruised and tear-stained. The Hayes family hadn't just leaked the story. They had delivered a perfectly packaged narrative of villainy. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Veronica Shaw, who had been an asset, was now a liability. She was suspended by the board pending an internal investigation. Her calls to Jonathan went unanswered. Her career was over. The brand she had so carefully cultivated was now irrevocably tied to a sordid abuse scandal. Jonathan locked himself in his office, the city lights that once looked like a conquered kingdom now mocking him. He was trapped. His company was under siege, his finances were imploding, and his name was being dragged through the mud. He finally understood. This wasn't business. This was personal. This was Robert Hayes. He felt a surge of defiant rage. He had built his empire from nothing. He wouldn't let this old money dinosaur destroy him. He would fight back. He picked up his phone to call his own lawyers, his PR team, to rally his loyalists. But as he looked at his contact list, a chilling realization dawned on him. His lead attorney had sat on a charity board with Robert Hayes for a decade. His PR firm's biggest client was a subsidiary of Hayes Global. The politicians whose campaigns he'd funded all owed favors to the Hayes dynasty. He hadn't built his own world. He had simply been allowed to play in theirs. And now his playtime was over. The siege was complete. He was surrounded, cut off, and his enemy controlled the air he breathed, the ground he stood on, and the money he spent. The empire of Jonathan Davenport was about to fall. The fall of Jonathan Davenport was not a slow decline. It was a detonation. In the space of 2 weeks, the empire he had spent a decade building was reduced to rubble. The relentless financial, legal, and public relations assault orchestrated by Robert Hayes was a masterclass in corporate destruction. The board of directors, men and women he had handpicked, forced him to take an indefinite leave of absence. It was a public execution disguised as a vacation. The stock price continued to plummet until a mysterious investment group, Orion Holdings, initiated a hostile takeover bid. The offer was insultingly low, but with the company bleeding value and creditors circling, the board had no choice but to accept. Jonathan, his own shares devalued to near worthlessness and his voting rights suspended, could only watch. His personal assets were frozen by court order, pending the outcome of Catherine's civil suit. The penthouse, the cars, the art collection, all were now just items on a legal ledger. He was forced to move into a sterile corporate apartment, a ghost rattling around in the ruins of his own life. The criminal assault charges had been filed, and a preliminary court date was set. The press followed him everywhere, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions he couldn't answer. He had gone from being the king of the city to its most infamous villain. Broken and desperate, he did the only thing he could think of. He tried to contact Catherine. He left dozens of voicemails, his tone shifting from rage to bargaining to pathetic, wheedling apologies. "Kate, please. We can fix this. It was a mistake. A terrible mistake. I was under so much pressure. Don't let your father do this to me, to us. This is insane, Catherine. You're destroying everything we built. Think of our son. Do you want him to have a father who has nothing? I'm sorry. Okay. I'm sorry. I'll do anything. I'll go to therapy. I'll fire Veronica. She's already gone, anyway. Just call this off. Please, I'm begging you." The calls were never returned. Finally, a message came, not from Catherine, but from Arthur Abernathy. "Ms. Hayes Davenport has agreed to see you, one time only, at her father's estate, tomorrow, 2 p.m. Come alone." A flicker of hope ignited in Jonathan's chest. This was it. His chance. He could still win her back. He knew how to charm her, how to manipulate her emotions. He would apologize, cry if he had to. He would remind her of the good times, of the man she fell in love with. He would make her see that her father was the real villain, an old man tearing their family apart out of spite. He arrived at the Hayes estate the next day, a man stripped of his power. He drove a rental car, wore a suit he'd had to buy off the rack. As he was led through the grand, silent house into a sunlit conservatory overlooking the gardens, he steeled himself, preparing his performance. Catherine was there, sitting in a comfortable armchair. She looked different. The fear was gone from her eyes, replaced by a calm, unyielding strength. Her pregnancy was more pronounced, and she radiated a serene power he had never seen in her before. Her father, Robert Hayes, stood by the French doors, his arms crossed, a silent, imposing guardian. "Catherine," Jonathan began, his voice thick with practiced emotion. "Thank God, I've been so worried. What my father has done—" "Stop," Catherine said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through his act like a razor. "Don't you dare call him your father. And what is happening to you is not his doing. It is yours. This is the consequences of your own actions, Jonathan. This is the reckoning." Jonathan was taken aback by her coldness. "Kate, listen to me. I love you. I was a fool. I was stressed. I wasn't myself. The man who shoved his pregnant wife against a marble table," she interrupted, her voice never rising. "That was you. The man who wrote emails about how to discard me after our child was born. That was you. The man who sneered that our son was a liability. That was the real you. The charming innovator was the mask. I see you now." She slid a sheaf of documents across the table toward him. Divorce papers. "I want nothing from you," she continued. "Nothing but your signature. You will have no claim to any Hayes family assets, and you will relinquish all parental rights to my son. He will carry my name, not yours. He will never know the monster who is his father." The finality in her tone was like a physical blow. His plan was crumbling. Panic began to set in. "You can't do that," he sputtered. "He's my son, my heir. I won't let you." "You have no choice," Robert Hayes said, speaking for the first time. His voice was low and deadly. "You will sign the papers. You will plead guilty to a lesser charge of reckless endangerment, which Mr. Abernathy has already graciously negotiated to spare my daughter the ordeal of a trial. In exchange, you will avoid jail time. If you refuse, I will unleash the full extent of the evidence we have against you, financial and personal, and I will personally ensure you spend the next 5 years in a state penitentiary. The choice is yours." Jonathan stared from Catherine's implacable face to Robert's granite expression. He was utterly, completely defeated. There was no way out. With a trembling hand, he took the pen and signed away his marriage, his son, his entire life. As he was about to leave, a broken and empty man, Robert Hayes added one final devastating blow. "By the way," he said, a thin, cruel smile touching his lips, "Orion Holdings, the company that just acquired what's left of Davenport Innovations. That's me. I own your life's work now, Davenport. Every patent, every line of code, every last desk chair. I bought it all for pennies on the dollar. You spent your life trying to build an empire, and in the end, all you managed to build was a new, profitable subsidiary for me." Jonathan stared at him, his mind unable to process the sheer, brutal totality of his ruin. He hadn't just been beaten, he had been erased. His legacy, the only thing he had ever truly cared about, now belonged to the man he had wronged, a final, crushing monument to his own failure. 6 months later, the sterile white walls of the maternity ward at Lenox Hill Hospital felt like the safest, most sacred place on earth. The chaotic storm of the past year had finally given way to a profound and beautiful calm. In Catherine's arms, wrapped in a soft blue blanket, was William Hayes, a perfect, healthy baby boy with a dusting of dark hair and his mother's determined eyes. She had named him after her maternal grandfather, a man of quiet strength and integrity. The name Davenport would never be associated with her son. The birth had been uncomplicated, a peaceful arrival after a turbulent journey. Her parents were there, Margaret weeping with joy, and Robert looking down at his grandson with a tenderness that few people ever saw. He placed a gentle hand on the baby's head, a silent promise of protection, a renewal of the vow he had made the night he declared war on Jonathan. Life had been rebuilt, not on the ruins of her old one, but on a new, stronger foundation. The Hayes estate had become her sanctuary and then her home. She had spent the last months of her pregnancy healing, not just physically, but emotionally. She rediscovered the parts of herself she had suppressed to fit into Jonathan's world. Her love for art history, her sharp business acumen inherited from her father, her quiet confidence. The fear had receded, replaced by a fierce, maternal resolve. She was no longer a victim. She was a survivor, a mother, a queen. The world outside continued to turn. Jonathan Davenport had become a footnote, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms. He had accepted the plea bargain and received a sentence of probation and court-mandated anger management therapy. He had vanished into obscurity, his fortune gone, his reputation obliterated. The last Catherine had heard, he was living in a small apartment in Queens, a disgraced pariah. Veronica Shaw had disappeared entirely, likely changing her name and moving to a city where no one knew her face. They were ghosts, irrelevant to the new life Catherine was building. Her father had been true to his word. He owned Davenport Innovations, but he had no interest in running a tech company. Instead, he gave Catherine a challenge, an opportunity. "It's yours to command," he had told her a month before she was due. "You can dissolve it, sell it off piece by piece. Or you can rebuild it. Remake it into something that reflects our values. Your values." After William was born, she made her decision. From a quiet office in her home, with her son sleeping in a bassinet beside her, Catherine began her new role as the chairperson of the newly restructured company, now called the Phoenix Initiative, under the Hayes global umbrella. She didn't want to erase Jonathan's work. She wanted to redeem it. She assembled a new board, prioritizing ethics and diversity. She directed the company's brilliant engineers to shift their focus from consumer gadgets and personal security to technology that could solve real-world problems, AI-driven logistics for disaster relief, communication systems for underserved communities, and data security protocols for humanitarian organizations. She was transforming a monument to one man's ego into a legacy of genuine progress. One crisp autumn afternoon, she stood by the window of William's nursery, rocking him gently in her arms. Outside, the leaves were turning brilliant shades of red and gold. The city skyline was visible in the distance, no longer a symbol of a gilded cage, but a reminder of the world she was helping to shape for her son. She looked down at his sleeping face, his tiny hand curled around her finger. He was her future, her purpose. The pain of Jonathan's betrayal would always be a part of her story, a scar to remind her of her own strength. But it would not define her. She had walked through fire and emerged not burned, but forged. Her father appeared at the door, a soft smile on his face. "He's a handsome boy," Robert said quietly. "He is," Catherine agreed, her voice full of love. "He's a Hayes." In that moment, she understood the true meaning of power. It wasn't about stock prices, or skyscrapers, or a name splashed across the news. It was the quiet, unbreakable strength of family. It was the resilience to build a new dawn from the ashes of the darkest night. It was the love for a child that gave her the courage to not just reclaim her life, but to build a better one, for herself and for the generations of Hayes yet to come. Thank you for joining us for this incredible story of betrayal and righteous revenge. Catherine's journey shows us that true strength isn't about enduring abuse, but but about finding the power to end it. When Jonathan Davenport chose his ego over his family, he underestimated the fierce love of a father and the unbreakable spirit of a mother-to-be. The Hayes family proved that some lines should never be crossed, and that the quiet, patient power of old money can dismantle a new money empire overnight when its most precious asset is threatened. What did you think of the Hayes family's total takedown of Jonathan's empire? Was it justice, or was it a step too far? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by Catherine's story of resilience and empowerment, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable real-life dramas. Your support helps us bring these powerful stories to light. Thank you for watching.